Hello, everybody. Hello, and welcome to Career Expert Roundtable. As always, I am Bill, the company's expert, and I have Abby with me from Life Work Balance. How you doing, Abby?
Doing well, Bill. I'm glad
Good.
that we have our kind of consistent stream set up. I'm excited to see what sorts of comments come through. And Bill and I were brainstorming ahead of time of what we might kind of start off our stream talking about today. And one of the things that came up for us was talking about bad bosses. So many times people choose to leave their job because of a bad relationship with their direct supervisor. So I'm curious for anyone who's watching or who will watch in the future, why you might be leaving your job.
Yeah,
Is
that's
it?
never happened before, having a bad
No.
boss. Yeah.
Yeah. And I was, thinking back when Bill and I were chatting earlier about, like, of the jobs I've had, how many I've left because of a poor relationship with a boss or a supervisor. And all of them, except for my most recent one, is that exact story.
Yeah.
And,
And
you
that's
know,
typical. That's typical of a lot of people. I don't know if that's like a thing that people have done research on. I'm sure it is, but I think it's like the number one reason why people leave, just because they've had a terrible boss.
it is. It
You just
is.
don't see eye to eye, So this is our weekly, bi-weekly, right? Bi-weekly every 2 weeks, collaboration. If you're watching this either on my channel or on Abby's channel or anywhere else that we don't know about, get in the chat. You should see a chat box somewhere nearby in the vicinity of our faces. Get in the chat. We're here to answer your questions, anything you got about bad bosses, about job search. If you are between jobs right now and you're wondering what the hell to do, you don't understand how anything works, or you need a bit of assistance with that, get in the chat. Let us know what you're wondering about, what you're struggling with, and we will do our best to help you out. Yeah, no, that is a common thing. Bad bosses are a common thing. A lot of people who leave their job voluntarily, it's because of that. It's because of personal relationships. It might not be your boss, but it could be coworkers, or it could be other things to do with that stuff. It's usually not the compensation. That's kind of surprising to a lot of people, but
Yep.
that's not the main reason why people leave. People will stay at a job where they could be making more money, but they'll stay there because they like it if they have good people surrounding them. That's
Yes.
a theme.
Absolutely. And you were right. When it comes to the research on why people leave their jobs, the number one reason why people leave their jobs is because of a bad relationship with their boss or their supervisor. So we can come back to this because I see Amazed put a nice comment into the chat, asking, how can someone professionally explain leaving a recent job due to misalignment with career goals and overall fit when speaking with a hiring manager? I mean, honestly, that's how I would answer it. You want to be relatively honest, but you don't need to give them all the details. The question probably comes up of, like, why are you leaving your current job, or why are you wanting to work here? And you can spin it in a really positive way that shows that, you're self-aware to recognize that there might have been this misalignment, and you're really excited about this next opportunity because you like the culture of the organization or the mission or, X, Y, and Z. So it's short and sweet. I recognize that it didn't meet my professional development goals, or there was a misalignment or misunderstanding in what the role was and what was actually done in the role. And moving on, talk about the positive things about why you're applying to this new job.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I agree with Abby. You could say this. It's already kind of well phrased, but I think there's like a deeper thing going on with this stuff. It's, like when you ask people, how are you doing? Hey, how are you doing? It's like, and then the other person, they go, oh, well, guess what happened to me? And then they launch into like a big story. Were you really looking for that?
Mm-hmm.
If someone is not doing 100% great, do you really want all the details? A lot of times people ask it kind of to be polite. It's a formality, but they're not really interested in all the details. Now, listen, I have a theory, okay? And Abby can tell me what she thinks of this because she's worked as a recruiter as opposed to me who hasn't. But when they ask this question, they might be looking for red flags. Like if you said like, oh, I hated my boss, they were a jerk, I can't stand these kind of people, or something. And it's like, okay, I'm glad I asked that because that's revealing something that might be kind of off about this person, right? But do you really need to know all the details, about that? Probably not. So my general approach is that even though you could say what you said here, Amazed, and that's perfectly fine, I would go a step further. I would just say, I'm ready to do more, and just leave it at that. If they don't ask any more questions or they don't probe, like, oh, how so? They don't probe into, I would just leave it at that. And then you can then turn the conversation into talking about this job, which is what they'll probably want to talk about more than something you did with some other company. And say, I'm ready to do more. I'm looking for this, and oh, coincidentally, that's what, this job it seems like it might have, right? And that's
Absolutely.
why I'm here, So just as a blanket kind of response to this, I would just say, I'm ready to do more.
Yep.
Any question about why are you leaving? What happened there? I'm ready to do more,
Yep. Well, and Amazed clarified with the third comment that they're leaving the job after barely a month on the job. And so in this case, like, maybe you don't even bring up this job. Maybe like if it's been that short of a period of time and you've like made this realization in that 1 month of being employed, you probably don't want to include it on your resume, because it probably didn't give you the experience that you needed to bolster your resume more than what you already have. And like, a month is not a very long time. And so depending on what your situation is, I don't have enough context to tell you exactly what to say or recommend what to say, but I would not even mention it, not even bring it up. And so if they ask like, why are you leaving your job or your current job? It's probably not on your resume from the application process if you're interviewing a month after getting hired. So you don't even need to bring it up. So you can talk about your last job, why you chose to leave that one. If you've been unemployed, then, talking about that, like, no need to even mention the job that you've been in for less than a month.
Yeah, it's almost like you would need, or what I'd recommend, in a weird way, it would be like to have almost like a strategy meeting with yourself before you do a job interview. I know that sounds really weird, but let me explain. It's like, before you just go into an interview, you kind of think for a second about like what you want to say to them. I think a lot of people, if I had to guess, I would easily believe that most people don't do this. They kind of go in like, well, I wonder what they're going to ask me. And then depending on what they're going to ask me, that's what I end up talking about, But instead of doing that, you kind of say like, okay, listen, when I go in there, I want to tell them that I have this and this and this, and I don't want to talk about this and I don't want to talk about that. And if I only have like 30 seconds to talk, to speak freely during this entire interview I'm going to do, I want to talk about this. I want to make sure that I get that point across. So when I walk out of there, it's not a situation where like, oh, I forgot to tell them about this amazing thing that I do. And it's the number one selling point for me. You know what I mean? So it kind of helps, because when they ask you questions like this, it's like you kind of realize, like, if you've told yourself like, listen, I don't want to talk about my previous job, it did not end well, or it's kind of winding down right now and it's not really going well, and I just don't want to get into it with them. I don't think anything is to be gained by going into all the nitty-gritty details of that. So if they ask me about it, I'm just going to try and steer everything back to talking about what I can do for them, or whatever it is. I think that people need to do a bit more of that, like to think a bit more along those lines before you do a job interview. Because if they ask you about your previous job, and the next thing you know, you spend the next half hour going into like every aspect of what you did and why things didn't work out and what it says about you, and that's not good. You might walk out of there forgetting like, okay, I didn't tell them that I had all the requirements. I didn't tell them that like I'm amazing at this. It really sucks I didn't say that, because I think that would be my big selling point.
Yep.
So that would help frame questions like this too when you get there.
Yes. And that is something that many people will just wing job interviews. They're like, well, I know my experience and I know my stories, and so I know all these things, so I'm just going to not prepare. But that is the
I'm just going to not prepare. That's my plan.
Yes. Because I already know it. Like, I already experienced these things. It's already filed in my brain somewhere. Like, I'll be able to pull it out. No, you've got to do some preparation work ahead of time and putting yourself into their shoes and saying, well, what are they really looking for out of someone who they're hiring for this position? Why might they be asking some of these questions? What are the underlying kind of hidden reasons for these questions? That's where that strategy comes in, so that you can truly be prepared to answer their questions.
Absolutely.
Now,
Absolutely.
Amazed had an additional clarification question, which was, what if I didn't mention it and it shows up in my background check? It might backfire because every single job I've ever had was listed on my background check. Now, it depends on what type of job you're applying for. I think bringing up in an interview and then lying on a background check form are very different. Excluding it during the interview process, they're probably not going to say, well, in our very first interview with this person, they said they didn't mention that they were in this job for a month. Like, I don't think they're going to have that type of recall and then judgment about your answer to that interview question, which likely happened early in the process rather than late in the process. And from my experience as a recruiter, background checks are usually criminal background checks. And then they also add in a section for employment verification. And that's where they might somehow reach out to your employer. There's usually like a process for it to just verify that you weren't actually employed there. You can include that in your employment verification and they can confirm that you were employed there. Or, like, I don't know the legality about this, but if it was for a month and you don't even, like, you got a single paycheck from it, then you may not even want to include it on your employment verification if you don't really consider that as a part of your employment.
Like, obviously this stuff is going to vary. I'm in Canada, you're in the States, you're in Colorado. And I mean, maybe even between states, it varies. I'm not sure, but it's like, you can correct me if I'm wrong, Abby. I'm under the impression that people are not going to do a background check until you get really far along in the process, like
Correct.
maybe the final interview or the final 3 or something like that. So if you're going into a job interview and you're worried about, like, I don't want to say anything because, I'm assuming they have my background check like at their fingertips and they can just verify anything that I say, I wouldn't worry too much about that. Like, when it comes to things like this, I would just get the job, get to that stage when you're going to be in the final 3, and then maybe that might come into the, to the puzzle, at some point. But oh no, should I mention that I've had this job for less than a month? If I don't mention it, is it on my background check? Then I wouldn't worry about it at this stage. I would get to that point first. That should be your priority now. You know what I'm saying? Because in all likelihood, the odds are against you even getting to the point where they're going to look at a background check. You know what I mean? So say what you need to say to make the best possible case to pass this round so that you get to the point where they might have a background check, and then you can worry about that when you get to that stage.
Yeah. And in most cases, when it comes to this type of situation, employers are more worried about you falsifying job experience than withholding experience.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't worry about it. I think that you're clearly concerned about it. So you're doing some, thinking about this whole, like, what if scenario. But I agree with Bill. If you make it to the point where you are filling out that background check form, many times they'll combine, at least here in the United States, like a Fair Credit Reporting Act, just because they're required to do that. They're not actually checking your credit. The criminal background check, where they're wanting to make sure that if you were, like, responsible in this new role for engaging with money or driving, that you don't have a criminal history that could show that you might try to swindle the company out of money, or that you're going to be unreliable when it comes to driving their vehicles. That's the sort of stuff they're looking for. And then again, they also probably have the employment verification as a part of that, like list the last, 7 addresses that you lived at and the last 5 employers you've worked at. You don't need to include an employer if you feel like it just wasn't a true employment experience.
Yeah, I agree. Triple homicide.
Yeah.
With a rake. Yeah.
That might be a little concerning. Yeah.
Keep them guessing. That's good. It's good to have some fun stuff on there just to have something to talk about. Let's see. Who do we got here?
And the Amaze added, you don't have to include a job before it shows up on a background check. Some checks are so thorough that every single previous job is pulled. I think you answered my question, though. Thank you. Of the background checks that I have helped run, they have been criminal background checks, not employment background checks. No.
Makes sense. Okay. Kerr for all says 61 and full of energy. That's awesome. right? 61 and full of joie de vivre, a certain je ne sais quoi, and ability. But ageism appears to be the roadblock. How early in the process do you let them know that you're not chasing the high range of the salary they posted? I don't know if you can say that in an early stage and have it be okay. Like, that's just my gut feeling. I would, if ageism is the issue, I don't think the solution is to like start talking about wants, wills, and needs about salary, like saying you can pay me very little and that's okay.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? What do you think? I'm interested in hearing Abby's thoughts on the ageism thing.
Yeah, and I've got a couple videos where I talk about ageism, so I'll search for them and put them in the chat if you are able to go back and find those links. But when it comes to ageism, it's not something you can prevent from happening because it's usually an unconscious bias that the person is engaging with. So they're not going to blatantly say, well, we're not going to, I mean, this could happen, but in most cases, because of all of the awareness around this, they're not going to blatantly say, well, we're not going to hire this person because they're 61 and they're going to retire soon or because they want the highest salary. They're going to come up with other reasons to choose not to move forward with you. Like maybe this person isn't as technologically savvy, or maybe they're more stuck in their ways and they're not as flexible and adaptable. Maybe they, X, Y, and Z, other reasons, not blatantly your age.
Maybe their hands shake terribly. Am I allowed to say that? I guess not. Only if they're a pilot.
Maybe. And even then, there's probably going to be people who are like, oh, how dare you?
How dare you, madam?
There are things that you can do during the interview process to subtly challenge those beliefs that they may be putting on you. So talking about how excited you are to, engage in this new process, how you can use your experience to train and mentor and coach younger employees or people in the organization, your ability to be adaptable and flexible. There's all these things that you will kind of subtly weave into the stories that you're telling during the interview process to counteract those biases that age and ageism create for people. So you don't let them know in the process early, hey, I know that I'm older, but you don't have to worry about me not wanting, like, I'm not here for the high salary. I'm here for whatever you're willing to offer me. You don't have to go there. If they ask you about the salary that you're expecting, be honest about what you're expecting. There's no need to lie about it and then like feel like you have to really fight for it at the end, or you feel blindsided at the end about what they're willing to offer you and things like that. So engage in the process honestly. But one of the things that you can do proactively is address some of their unsaid concerns with your answers during the interview process.
Yeah, it's like a preemptive strike, right? Before they have a chance to raise the issue, you're going to address it first, right?
Yeah. And again, I'm in the United States, so laws are a little bit different in other countries. But here in the United States, they're not allowed to ask you how old you are. There are some ways that they can still figure out how old you are. So like on your resume, you don't need to include graduation dates from universities or high schools or anything like that. You don't need to include jobs that are older than 15 years. So you can include just the most recent experience. And so there are things that you can do to hide your age if you don't want to be super obvious about it. So if you have that professional summary at the top of your resume, you don't need to say 30 plus years of experience in X, Y, and Z. You don't need to share that specific number when you're telling them about yourself at the beginning of the interview. Instead, you can still share that you have a wide range of experience with these different populations of people or in these different areas, but you don't need to share the specific numbers that will then help them create bias for you.
They're not allowed to ask your age, but then they come in with a tray of drinks and they say, would you like an energy drink, a Coors Light, or some prune juice? And they go off that, right? It's a very
I brought my
subtle
own water bottle.
That's right. It's very, very subtle what they do, but
Mm-hmm.
it's effective. Listen, that makes a lot of sense. I haven't really thought about that kind of stuff, but it makes a lot of sense. I mean, I'm sure there isn't a perfect solution, but the problem with this is that obviously you're having to guess what their biases might be. that they could be biased against the age thing. I find in a lot of the stuff that I see, the comments I read is like when people explain to me, the details of when they say, oh, I was up against ageism and stuff. It's like, to me, it really feels like, well, it seems like you're making the assumption it was ageism because there's nothing that you're telling me that they did that's a clear indication of that. It's all just, you didn't get it, so you assumed it was ageism.
Mhm.
That doesn't necessarily mean that you were wrong, but that could also be a bias of yours. Oh, you interviewed with a 21-year-old, you're 61, you just assumed, and you didn't get it, so you just assumed that they were biased against you for the age thing. That may not be the case. But then, of course, you're also having to guess as to what their bias is. So if they got a problem with the age thing, oh, it's because they assume that, what did you say, Abby, that they can't embrace technology, that they refuse to work with certain people, or they're stuck in their ways, or they can't be trained. Like, you could go through a whole laundry list of stuff. And the problem is, I imagine, with this approach is that it's better than nothing, but it's like you're still having to guess as to what the person could have a problem with, and you might be off base there too.
Yep.
So, I mean, beyond this, I know you kind of answered the question, but I'm interested to talk to you about this actually. Is there something beyond this that anyone can do? Because this is good, but is there any other thing? I haven't heard of any other thing you could do to address this. So,
yeah, I mean, you could just blatantly bring up the elephant in the room and say, I know I'm older, and here's what I bring to the table that's unique from every other candidate that you will interview.
Yeah, like the preemptive strike.
Yeah, that's bold, and it could really, take a hiring manager and say, like, wow, they're right.
Like, listen, I realize I'm probably a little older than the average applicant for this, but I just want you to know X, like this, and this, something like that. I mean, that seems pretty effective.
Yep. And you take that response, whatever you're going to be sharing with the hiring manager or the interviewer, and the goal is to ultimately bring it back to the goal of the role. They have a goal for this position. They have things that they want this position to achieve. They have their preferred qualifications, their minimum qualifications. They have their overall organizational, like, mission statement, vision statement, values. Like, if you can connect your experience and why you're the best fit for this position to those things, age really shouldn't matter. There will always be cases where you could be discriminated against because of your age, regardless of what you do. But I would say these days it's not going to be as in your face as it maybe has been in the past. And I sent a bunch of chats because my URL was connected with my title of my video. So anyway, the most recent chats that we got in there are for the video on how to beat age bias, top tips for older job seekers.
The only thing that I would recommend for people, the only other thing I can think of is, like, as much as possible, you can pick and choose, especially when you're doing networking as a way of getting a job, is you can pick and choose who you talk to. So if you're 61 and you're worried about ageism, if you talk to another 61-year-old, chances are they're not going to have an issue with you because of your age, and vice versa. If you're 21 and you feel that, people are not taking you seriously because you're young or whatever, it's like, once again, if you're talking to a 61-year-old, you might be concerned about that. Well, if you're doing the networking thing and you are reaching out to people, you can, especially if you're looking at them, looking at LinkedIn to get targets to, like, reach out to people, reach out to another person in charge that looks like they're more closer to 21 than they are to 61. And you shouldn't have too much problems with the ageism thing. You know what I mean? So that's the only other thing I can think of for this.
Yeah.
Igor, or Igor, depending if you've seen the movie Young Frankenstein, says, hello, everybody. How to prepare for a short 20-minute call? What is the recruiter looking for in a short call before an interview? Great question. Igor, it's some kind of screening call or something is what I'm guessing.
Yes, and I have 2 videos on phone screen, so I am adding those to the chat right now. And really what it comes down to is, if you're doing a phone screen with a recruiter and it's 20 minutes or less, they're just wanting to make sure that you meet the minimum qualifications, and they might be doing a culture check. So they will be like asking you some basic questions about the minimum qualifications and how you align with them. And many times these phone screens are scheduled for 20 minutes, but they don't even go the full 20 minutes. I just worked with a client who had a 30-minute phone screen and his went 20 minutes, but all the people that he talked to who had also applied to this job, they were 15 minutes or less. So it's usually like just a big block just in case, but they have, maybe 5 to 10. 10 is a lot, but 5 questions that they would ask you that are very basic, related to the minimum qualifications of the job, because they want to make sure that they're forwarding people who truly do meet the minimum qualifications to the next round. Not just minimum qualifications, though. They're also looking to hear some of those preferred qualifications come through.
So check out Abby's videos on the links that she just posted.
Mm-hmm.
Alex says, how do I manage a toxic line leader that always checks on you? My line leader checks on me as he also wants to hear what I communicate with my colleagues too. So this person is a micromanager and they're toxic on top of it. So that's a delightful combination.
Yes. And there's some additional comments with some more context. So he says,
okay.
He's helpful when we have problems with the production machines, but he's late when he helps us. We wait for him and he doesn't answer the phone when we call him, but late. I know that this is not the main subject, but I do know that the issues related to my situation. Okay. Yes. So this is tough because when you're working with managers and other people in general, you've got to kind of adapt your style to match theirs or decide that this isn't a good fit for you. If you, and Bill, I'll be interested to hear your opinion on this too. If you choose to do things your way and not adapt to meet their style and then get frustrated with your manager for, checking in and doing all of these things, you're just going to be frustrated. So you can make the choice to adapt your style to match more towards theirs. If they feel like they're checking in with you, they're wanting certain things, they're wanting to know clarifications. Like maybe if I'm going to communicate with my colleague, I send a follow-up email to my supervisor and let them know that I had this conversation with my colleague, so I can just prevent them from needing to check in with me to begin with. Maybe learn their communication style. Do they prefer to get things in writing ahead of time, or do they want to talk on the fly? So we got to learn our manager, because it's much easier for me, one person, to adapt to my manager's style, one person, than my manager to adapt to 3+ or 15 different styles of all the people they're responsible for. So it will make your life much easier if you can identify their style and change the things that you do to make their life easier, which will ultimately make your life easier. And as for, him being late and him being helpful, but still being late, there's not much you can do about that, because that's his problem. His inability to be timely there's not much you can do about it, unless you can say, okay, is there a way that I can communicate this with him ahead of time or provide him with a heads up before the situation arises? But it will take some proactive work on your part to try to compensate for him.
Yeah. I'd say, obviously it depends on the details. Like this could go a variety of different ways. It's not detailed enough to say what you would need to do, but you have a couple of tools at your disposal. Kind of like what Abby was saying, communication is the big one. Now, if you are good at communicating, okay, that means that you can articulate what you are, when you say something about what you're feeling or what your opinions are. You could do it in a diplomatic way. You could also ask for information. So if you find that this individual is micromanaging you, maybe they're doing it in some kind of weird hostile way that, you're picking up on signals, like maybe they're doing it to either try and intimidate you or to make you uncomfortable or to make some other point that, maybe is clear or unclear. You could say, like, listen, hey, it's been a week, it's been a month, whatever. I noticed that you keep coming and looking at what I've done in great detail. I also noticed that you don't seem to be doing that to anyone else, or maybe this person does. I'm not sure what the situation is. If you could help me understand precisely what you're looking for here, then I could be able to be more forthcoming, give you what you need, or if you are wanting me to do something different, if you could be a bit more clear about that, that I could do it. Because I'm just a little interested why you're giving me this treatment, but I don't see you doing it to anyone else, and I'm wondering what's up with that, so something like that. Like, you can basically explain what's going on. You can request clarification, and you can do it in such a way that's not super, like, it's very, very clear, but it's not hostile. It's not like anything that would indicate that you're doing anything wrong, like you're antagonizing the boss or questioning them, or anything like that. So you got all those tools at your disposal, basically saying, like, listen, what's up? If you could help me understand why you're doing this, then that would help me. It would also put me a little bit more at ease, because I'm not sure if you're finding fault with anything I'm doing, right? I just prefer it if I understood why you're doing this and what you're looking for. Secondly, it's a little unclear from Igor's comment for me. You mentioned this person is toxic. It could be a situation where this person is trying to intimidate you. They could be trying to bully you. Maybe they are subtly wanting to put pressure on you for some other reason. Maybe they want you to leave voluntarily or whatever, or request a transfer to another group or whatever. So, if it's that kind of behavior, if it's more like a bullying, toxic kind of thing, and you feel that they're trying to intimidate you or target you, there's ways for you to handle that properly and effectively. There's things that are very constructive to help with that. There's other things as a last resort that make it so that the manager does not want to do that with you because it's painful. Because if they come over and they say, hey, are you going to check up on me now? What's going on now? Or something like this, where you're employing their tactics back at them. If they're trying to intimidate you and they almost appear hostile, but they're not crossing a certain line, you can adopt those same tactics back to make it painful for them. So they know that every time they come and talk to you, they're going to have like a big ordeal on their hands. It's not going to go easy for them. And after a while, they'll get a message that, like, okay, that's not something you do to this person. It's not going to be easy. There's a variety of stuff here, but I mean, the main one I would try is just communication, both ways. I don't like this. And if you could help me understand what's going on, I'd appreciate it. If you're looking for something I can help you with.
Yes. And there's one additional comment from Alex about this that's a little bit further down, not all the way at the bottom, because I have put in some additional links to the chat. But it's the comment says, he says that me and my colleague could do what we want our way or as he wants. He gives us his options. We've decided to make a good team, him and his colleague, so to not call him often. I think that's a setup, because what that is telling me is that your manager is saying, I would like you to do it my way, but I'm not going to force you to do it because I'm conflict resistant. So that's the message that I'm getting from that. And so it's up to you. You can manage and do things your way, but that may come with him following up with you more than you would like, checking in with you and your colleagues separately to kind of test to see if you guys are doing things the same way. And so when it comes to relationships with your boss, you are in a position where you can choose how this relationship is going to go. It's not going to guarantee that the relationship will be great, but if you can do things that make your boss's life easier, and you can put yourself in their shoes and do things the way that they might like you to do it, or prepare a reason as to why you're going to do it differently to kind of show them the options and help them feel like they have some control, that's going to probably make your life easier and your job more enjoyable. Or you can choose to not do it, have more of a difficult relationship with your boss, and likely have to start the job search sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I would add that, like, the reality is that this person has been put in charge, and they are obviously doing things a different way than you would have them do it. And the problem is that what a lot of workers want, and it's totally understandable, is they want to be able to do things their way, and they want the boss to just be okay with that. And the problem is that what the boss wants one way or another usually goes. There are
Yeah.
exceptions to that, but unfortunately, that's the baseline situation, and you know, people don't like that uncomfortable reality. Now, the boss could be an idiot. They could not know what they're doing. They could be unreasonable in their requests that you do things the way they want instead of the way you want. You might know a lot more than them and all this kind of stuff. And it shouldn't go that way. Unfortunately, sometimes it does. And if you go head to head with the boss on that one, you can expect as a default management to support the boss, right? That's usually how this goes, because ultimately they have responsibility for how things go in their little area of responsibility. So,
Well, and
um,
I know that most people who get hired are like, well, you hired me because I know how to do this. So why are you
yeah,
micromanaging me? And like the definition of conflict, like let's just define why this conflict happens. Conflict is the gap that occurs between what we want and what we're actually experiencing. So if what I want is different from what I'm experiencing, then I'm going to get some conflict of some sort. So we need to understand what our boss wants and what we want, so that when we get something that's different than what we want, we can figure out how to mediate that or reduce the impact that that difference has.
yeah. But a common situation is that also that you might have been hired by someone and they believe in you, and that's why they selected you.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe then you get a boss that inherits you. They didn't choose you. They might not have selected you, but now they're in charge of you. And just as you're unhappy about having that new person be your boss, they might be unhappy about, okay, now I got to work with this team. I didn't pick this team. These are not the people that I would have picked, that click with me and my approach and all this kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So unfortunately, that's an all too common scenario where, we have to make that work. And sometimes it's just not easy. People just have different opinions on how stuff should be done. And sometimes unfortunately, the worker has to bow to that a lot of the time to
Yeah.
make it work. And it shouldn't happen like that. But in order to make this kind of entity flow, it has to. It has to. People have to be open minded to that.
Yeah. And Alex added one more thing to the chat at the very bottom, which says, I'm new and my colleague has 3 months of experience. He, I'm assuming the boss, said that we stayed too much in the 10-minute pause, which is like the 10-minute break, I'm assuming, after he gave us a late break, although half of the break is taken getting to and from the kitchen. So I'm assuming that's the type of job you're doing. And
Is there a
so,
souffle involved in this story? There should be. If there isn't, you
yeah.
should
And so
make
right
one
here,
and bake it for your boss and bring it in.
yeah. And
That
so
would smooth things
as
over.
Alex's comments are coming through, it's just sounding like there's either a miscommunication, which is probably what's going on here, or lack of communication. And so the boss has these assumptions about what is going to happen. And then when those things don't happen, then it causes this conflict. And so it would probably be to your benefit, Alex, to clarify things with your boss as they're happening, so that you are
Absolutely.
absolutely sure about what they want and what they're expecting of you, so that you're not blindsided by his frustration or feeling upset about whatever outcome. And you're also not feeling micromanaged. And so in the moment, let's say your boss gives you a break and it's late, saying, okay, just to confirm, this is 10 minutes and you want us to be back here at this time. Like just going through those extra communication and clarification steps could also make your life much easier.
Yeah, that I agree with Abby. What I think you need to do, Alex, if possible, if you can do this, is go talk to your boss, like one on one. Maybe if there's somebody else involved, they could do it together. But I try it one on one. Do it after lunch on a Friday if you don't know when else to do it. Just that's generally a good time. People aren't stressed. They aren't super busy. They're in a happy mood. The weekend's coming. They've just had food. Uh, Go talk to them and say, like, listen. You know, I've noticed over the last little bit that this is the situation. This is what's happening. Listen, what I think would be really cool is if I notice you're doing this, and I don't fully understand why, but if you could explain to me maybe what you're looking for, what you want, that would help me. And then it would help me be able to give you what you want and meet your expectations if I understood what those expectations were. So you
Yes.
come in with the right attitude, you're friendly, it's constructive. You don't come in with like, I got a problem. It's like, no, I think it's working, but this could work better if we did this. You explain to me what you want, and then I'll try my best to give that to you, and then we all get along and everything works out, and we
Yeah.
all live happily ever after.
And
um,
it's hard when you're in a new
you know
role. You said you're new. But this is actually the perfect opportunity to have this conversation with your boss because you don't have any history at this point. And it makes sense because you're new. So you're learning new things about this boss. You're learning about the role. And so while it might feel uncomfortable to have a conversation with them, it's going to be probably more effective for you in the long term to clear this up now.
and then just tell them kung fu, and then
Mhm.
just all falls into place. The
Yeah.
problem
Liam
solves itself.
Neeson, I will find you.
But hopefully that was helpful. Those are some options there.
Yeah.
Hopefully one of those will work. Where did we leave off? Like, we've been jumping around here. Was this
We
the
have
next one, like with Amazed? Did we do
um
this one?
no, it's one more down from Amaze. So Amaze is
Okay,
the
so
next comment. So
Alex.
it's a 2-week notice. Is a 2-week notice necessary when leaving a brand new job? It might feel awkward, and there's even a chance the employer could terminate you before the notice period ends. This is always tough. I think if you're honest with them, my gut is telling me, yes, you should do the 2-week notice because that's kind of the standard that's expected, at least here in the United States. And understand that you're probably in this probationary period where they could terminate you for any reason. So there is a danger that you could be terminated early before the 2-week period. But if you are, in a relatively good position with your manager where you can say like, this is just not working for me. It's not working for you either. I think there's been a mismatch or a misalignment. I'm in the process of, or I've accepted a new job. I've given, I told them I would be able to start in 2 weeks. I'd be happy to wrap up the things that I've started in this first month. And that's my expectation, kind of go from there. I would say that most managers, and this is a hope, and this is maybe me with my rose-colored glasses on, are going to have some compassion for that and some understanding. So they're not going to say, that's it, you're out of here, move along, because they still also need to go through the hiring process to fill your role. So they're not going to have someone who's waiting in the wings, ready to jump in and take over your job. And so I think from a professional etiquette perspective, giving 2 weeks notice is best practice. And also know that it runs the risk of you being terminated early. That could happen. I hope it doesn't, but it could happen.
Maybe they do things a bit differently in the States from Canada. I'm in Canada, just if you just tuned in. I'm not the type of person that has to keep mentioning that, but just if you're new here, so I understand this. So the way it works up here, and I thought this was the case in the States, is that the required notice changes depending on a couple of things, including like how long you've worked there. So if you work there, I believe where I am right now, and I assume this is the same for all of Canada, if you've worked at a place for less than 30 days, you don't have to give a notice. You just say, I'm out of here. If you've been there for 1 year, you have to give 1 week. If you've been there for more than a year, like 2 weeks. And then there's like, it goes up from there. Like if you've been there 10 years, you have to give 4 weeks, and more than 10 years or something, like it's like, I think 5. So
Not
like,
that way in the United States.
yeah. So now, I mean, that you can give that notice, but then they can say, well, we're going to pay you in lieu of notice.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, that's not like I've had that experience twice where you give your notice and they like, okay, then they march you right out the door that moment. Essentially, they march you to your locker, you do the box thing, and then they march you right out the door. So it's up to the employer how they want to do that. But what I would say is that if you're listening to this like around the world, you're not in Canada or the US, just be familiar with your local laws. Usually you can look that right up,
Yep.
in Google, do a Google search for like, employment standards, and then your your country or region, like that kind of thing. If I was in the States, I would probably do that. Is that what you can do, Abby? You could say like employment standards or labor laws, and then
Yeah.
Colorado or something like that, and then it brings up the act. Like can you read that? Do you have
Yeah,
access?
and I would say there's not a formal law that is
Mm.
saying you must give X number of days or weeks of notice for the United States. There may be something written into a contract that you've signed, or so if I'm working as a contract employee, there might be something in my contract stating that I have to give 30 days notice or something like that. But for most standard employment, I would say the best practice is 2 weeks notice. Unless you then get into a high level of management or leadership, then it might be a longer period of notice. But for a standard entry level to you know, senior individual contributor, 2 weeks notice is what people are expecting in the United States.
Okay. Well, this just illustrates how things work differently in different countries around the world. So just whatever country you're in, just be familiar with what the law is there, what the requirements are. You know what I mean? Any company, presumably, or organization is going to have to comply with the law of the land wherever you happen to be. So
Yep.
just be aware of that.
Well, and then in the United States, you've got like at will employment states. You've got all these other things that are, in there. Then you've got your probationary period. So there's lots of stuff that could be at play. Knowing that some of the background context from Amaze's comments, I would say that giving a 2 weeks notice is best practice. Probably not required. If you don't give 2 weeks notice, then you're probably just not going to use that job as a reference. You're probably not going to really mention them on your resume. So it doesn't really matter anyway. But that 2 weeks notice is best practice. It's not going to burn bridges. And you can have that kind of honest conversation with your direct supervisor, and they'll probably agree.
Makes sense. So someone says, hi, both. I followed your advice to connect with the recruiting team and hiring manager on LinkedIn. I was ghosted, so I guess we'll have to wait their systems feedback applying to others. Okay.
When I think ghosted might mean like no response, or
Yeah.
it means that they like engaged with you and then they just quit engaging with you. In each of those cases, I wouldn't take it personally, especially if you just connected with them like right as you were applying to a job and you didn't have much of a relationship with them to begin with. I'm the perfect example of someone who is like not on LinkedIn frequently, and I pick and choose who connects with me. I look at people's headlines, and if it looks like they're trying to sell anything, I don't connect with them because I do not need another sales pitch in my inbox. And, if someone connects with me on LinkedIn who's not trying to sell something, but is wanting something for free from me, then I'm very skeptical about doing that. So you want to make sure that you build a relationship with someone before you go in for that ask. So connecting with someone on LinkedIn and then expecting them to push your application through is setting yourself up for that type of failure over and over again.
And for the record, I don't recommend people connect to a recruiting team on LinkedIn and go that route. I never have recommended that. I mean, I know some people do. I think Abby does. That's fine. I'm sure it works for some people, but I don't particularly find that productive. So
yeah, and you
there
have
go.
to be very intentional about it. If you just reach out to a hiring manager on LinkedIn and you just say, hi, I applied to this job, what is there for them to respond to? So instead, if you can find those recruiters and then they respond to you and they discuss, the application process, or you are able to send them your resume after some back and forth, you'll probably get more benefit from that. But I'm not an avid LinkedIn user anyway. So I'm probably not the best person to be taking advice from when it comes to connecting with them on LinkedIn and expecting something in return right away.
Yeah, we got G4 says, hi, my name is Nestor. I received a response that read, you provided us. We are unable to meet your current compensation expectations for this position. Any suggestions? Well, this just reiterates like why you should avoid giving them that. The reason they ask you for anything to do with compensation when you're in the application stage is not to have any kind of serious discussion with you about how much pay you should get that would satisfy you. It's simply to eliminate you. That's the sole reason why that is asked. So if you could possibly avoid it, you avoid it. If it's in a form, this is a pet peeve of mine, by the way. I talk about how to, in my videos, I had a video come out like last week saying how to address this in a job interview when they ask you, they say, what is your current salary? and what are your salary expectations? And there's a way of responding to that, but then people immediately say, but you can't say that because they ask it to you on an application. It's like, yeah, I know you handle it differently on an application. In an application where where the field is mandatory and you must give a single number, you can't give a range and you can't write words. I recommend you write the lowest possible number that you would ever accept. If every element about this job that they haven't mentioned yet turns out to be like best case scenario. So like they haven't told you for example, what are your benefits? That's not in the job posting. They haven't told you, is this shift work? Is there travel requirements? How much vacation do you get? Is your boss going to be a colossal prick, psychopath? You don't know any of this. So just assume that everything that you don't know is perfect. Okay. It's absolutely perfect. And then write in that number, what's the lowest number you'd accept to take that. Okay. And that's how you handle that, in my opinion. That would be my recommendation.
Yeah. And I even wonder what would happen if you put 0. Like if it's a mandatory field and you put 0, obviously you're not going to accept a job for $0. But that's it. So past salary is illegal to ask in the United States. You cannot do that. Current salary
is that everywhere in the United States? Because I thought that was like on a state by state basis.
Yeah,
because some people, I'm just going off comments that I've heard. Because I know in places like California, they said you can't ask that in California, but maybe in like Wyoming or something, you can.
Yeah,
I don't know. That's what I.
It might be state by state basis. In Colorado, you cannot ask that.
The other thing is like if they ask that, if they ask it anyway, you need to be prepared,
Yeah.
Like if you say, that's an illegal question, and then walk out of the interview, it's like, okay, fair enough, but you lost, right? Are you going to like set the police on them or something? I mean, like what would you do if they ask that? Because people ask it anyway. You get hiring managers that are ignorant of all the subtle laws and stuff in their region, and they ask stuff when they're not supposed to.
Yeah.
You got to be prepared,
Yeah. Well, and I think going back to Nestor's specific comment, if you provided them with a salary range or a number that you thought was reasonable, and they let you know that they're unable to meet the current compensation expectations, it's probably not going to be a good fit for you.
Yeah, exactly.
If you feel like you overestimated how much you wanted to get paid, then you could try to engage in a conversation with them and say, could you tell me a little bit more? I'd like to talk to someone about this.
Yeah, I'm cynical. I would do it anyway if they, you know what I'm saying? Because that's also a tactic. I mean, maybe people aren't this sophisticated for like worker level jobs. If that's what this is, I don't know. Maybe in the construction business, they might be unscrupulous enough to do this, but or certain other industries, real estate, where there's not a lot of ethics going on. But you know what I mean? Like it can also be a tactic. They're telling you, oh yeah, we can't meet your salary expectation, but they're still willing to have you come in for an interview. Like that's a red flag. That suggests that that's horseshit. What they're saying, if I can say that. You know what I mean? So usually if you're asking for too much, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Abby, the standard thing is to just stop communication with you. You're no longer in the running. You're expecting too much. What would be the point of pursuing it with that candidate?
Yeah. And Nestor just added to the very bottom of the chat, I put my lowest rate on the application. So if it's the lowest that you're willing to accept, and they're saying that we're unable to meet these compensation expectations, then that's end of the road right there. I think.
Yeah, it doesn't look very promising. I mean, either they're lying through their teeth, which is not a good sign, or they're being honest and they can't actually meet your absolute minimum requirement. That's also not a good thing. So
yeah, the only other thing to consider is maybe your expectations are too high. So you need to do some market research to identify what the standard salary range is and what the average is for this type of role. And maybe realign your expectations. If I'm going to work and, if I'm working a minimum wage job at a local fast food restaurant and I'm expecting $45 an hour, that is unrealistic. So I need to realign that I'm actually going to get paid probably closer to $15 or $18 an hour, which is significantly less than my expectations. So that could also be the situation we're facing with this comment, but
Yeah.
it might not be. And if the organization that you're applying to work for and the role that you're applying to work for, the average market rate is what you put as your lowest, then this role is not for you.
And Abby is absolutely correct with that. You need to have some awareness of like what people are paying in the real world. But I just want to sort of add a detail, and that is that market price is the average. First of all, assuming that it's accurate, which a lot of times it isn't, because it may be close to being accurate for like a lot of common jobs where you can get a lot of data on it. But there's a lot of other positions out there that, like, in say a certain location, like a city or whatever, there may not be that many of those positions there in that location.
Mm-hmm.
And there's even like so much less of those that you have data on. You know what I mean? So getting an average is usually far from accurate. The other thing then, assuming that it is accurate and you looked it up on a site like Glassdoor or, PayScale, whatever, and you got a number, it may be a number, and here's like the range, here's the median, whatever. It's like, the other thing is that if that's accurate, that's what the average employer is paying for an average level employee.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you may be neither. You could be above average, you could be below average, you could be working for an employer that intentionally pays above the market, meaning that they pay more than the average, because
It's
then
more competitive.
yeah, in theory, they get the best employees. They can treat them worse and they won't leave, and they can push them harder, right?
Mm-hmm.
Other companies, they intentionally pay below market, meaning that they will pay intentionally below the average price that's discoverable. They understand that they may not be able to retain the best employees in that role, but they're fine with it because they're making cost savings in their labor force that's justifying the employee turnover and maybe the lack of high end performance or something, and they're fine with that. And what you get is you get companies that they pay below the market. They'll pay below the average price, the average compensation for maybe a worker level role or an entry level role. But then when you go upscale 1 or 2 levels, they pay above market price in those other levels. So if you get in there, get your foot in the door, stay there for 6 months or a year, get promoted to the next sort of level up, and then maybe one more level, then you could be really cleaning up. So it's very deceptive how that stuff works.
I've actually worked for an organization that saw themselves as a stepping stone organization. So they never had the budget to
that's what they tell people.
Yeah. So they never had the budget to pay people at market rate. It was a government organization, so they were limited from taxpayer money and things like that.
I'd believe them a lot more if it was a government organization.
Yeah, so it was a government organization. And so they paid, there was like the average employee pay within the organization, which was significantly less than the actual market rate in the state. And that was one of the things that they said, like, we recognize that we're not able to compete with other organizations from a salary perspective. So here are the other benefits that you would get from working here when it comes to culture, flexibility, X, Y, and Z. So people would choose to work for the organization that I worked for those other benefits beyond salary, but knew that it was a stepping stone organization, which means that they were to build their skills, build their network, and then step out to a different organization that could meet their compensation expectations later.
There's all kinds of stuff. You need to do some minimal research into companies, especially that you're going to interview with. Like, I understand for applying for jobs, you might just apply and you're not going to do a ton of research into each company. But certainly for the companies that call you in for an interview, do your research, because, like, for example, a company I worked for that I helped run, we couldn't pay as much as like our big competitors that were like multinational corporations. We paid quite a bit less, but we still retained the top talent in our location because we made up for it in other things. For a start, this company treated people like human beings and not cattle. And so a lot of the top talent came to us and stayed there, even though they could make technically higher pay across the street figuratively, they didn't go because, if they were sick, people let them, you're off sick, fine, come back when you're ready. It's not an issue. If you need to go, you need to pick up your kid from work or whatever, that's fine. Go, uh, if you can stay late sometime in the next week to make up for it, if you want to do it that way, that's fine. Like, it just very, very flexible and treated people like human beings. And it was because of that policy that started long before I arrived there. But because of that policy, they had a bit of a reputation in that industry in our city. And so everybody who was working there had spread like through word of mouth. It kind of spread. This is a great place to work. You want to work here. And so it was very desirable. So even though we weren't paying the highest levels, we still retained all the best people. So it's deceptive. And if you were hiring, you had to do the thing that Abby just said, which was like saying, like, look, okay, we can't meet the highest compensation that perhaps other people are paying for this job. But, if you do your research, you'll see there's a lot of advantages working here. We've got a great reputation, blah, blah, blah. So there might be more to it. So just be fully informed when you go to any job interview. At least take like 5 minutes on the internet just to look them up, read what people might have said about them in reviews and things like this, because it might make sense.
Well, I think my last piece of advice for Nestor, and really anyone when it comes to the salary portion of the job search process, is be honest with yourself about what your true minimums are.
Yes.
And do not go below that, but also overinflating what you need can reduce the amount of opportunities that are available to you. So you don't want to, like, let's say I believe I'm worth $100,000, but the types of jobs that I'm applying to and the types of jobs that I need to sustain my lifestyle are $60,000. If I'm applying to $60,000 jobs expecting $100,000, that is going to be a big discrepancy that the employers are going to want to clear up from the beginning and not waste anyone's time if I'm expecting a $40,000 difference. So look at your finances, try your best to learn about the things, the other types of compensation that you can get, the total compensation from this organization. Maybe you can figure out health insurance premiums. Maybe you can figure out how many days off or sick leave you're going to be entitled to. Maybe there's flexible working arrangements. All of those things should calculate into your final number so that if they don't pay for health insurance, if they don't give you flexibility, if they don't do these things, that's like the minimum that you need. But if they provide all of these things, what is the true minimum that you would take?
Yeah, know your position before you go in there. Someone says, any tips on taking the leap to apply for jobs you don't have the qualifications for? Well, there's qualifications and then there's qualifications, right? I mean, yeah, like, okay, there's a couple of things where there's like an absolute line in the sand. If they need a law degree, to practice law and you don't have a law degree, and this is for a practicing lawyer, then you're probably not going to get it, right? I mean, pretty cut and dried. But a lot of other things, it's more like a gray area, especially like if the job is not a profession, there isn't like a sort of license for you to be in that role. Then it's anybody's perspective as to what the qualifications are. And then sometimes even, do you meet those qualifications, right? Because the way these things get created, generally speaking, is, and Abby knows this. I mean, the hiring manager sort of is the person who says like, okay, I need someone else in my group, so we got to post a job. I just got the budget approved, so fine, we got to do a job posting, and I got to get a recruiter to find me some qualified people. And then the recruiter says, well, okay, so I'm recruiting for a position. What's the requirements that you need? And then the hiring manager goes, ooh, geez, I never thought of that before. I don't know. I guess some experience doing this would be good. The recruiter says, how much? And the hiring manager says, I don't know, 5 years, I guess. Right. So next thing you know, you've got a job posting coming out that says, requirements, 5 years experience in this. Now, is that like an absolute thing that you must meet? What qualifies as experience in that area? Is it all in one continuous block, or is it a little bit here, a little bit here? Can it be concurrent, or does it have to be sequential? it's really, no one's thought through details like that for a lot of jobs. So
Mhm.
are you qualified? Or maybe you go back to the thing saying, look, I've only had 6 months experience in that, but quite frankly, I can do the job. You know, it's pretty clear I can do the job. So, if you'd rather work with me than with somebody else, maybe you decide to waive the 5 year thing. In my case, 6 years, 6 months is fine, but I've got all these other things in my favor.
Mhm.
So if there's any doubt, I would say the Chalice TV, I would say just go for it. You know what I mean? And if you feel that at the end of the day you can do the job, or you feel that you're highly trainable to pick up, like, any kind of slack there, I just go for it and make the best possible case you can why you're qualified.
I put my link to the video about transferable skills in the chat, which will also help with this. I would say look at the minimum qualifications and then the preferred qualifications. In most cases, there will also be like exception language. So, minimum qualification, a bachelor's degree in, you know, one of the following subjects or related, very open ended. And then if there's no education, then we want 3 years of experience in this area. So keep an eye out for some of that like exception language. And then if you truly don't meet the minimum qualifications at all, like there's no way that you can even justify in your brain how you meet the minimum qualifications, don't waste your time applying for it.
Yeah.
But if you're like, hey, I have X number of months or years of experience in this area and in this area, and I think that I could really do this job well because I have these skills. If you can justify it to yourself, you can justify it to the hiring team. So the challenge will be getting through the application portion for them to then choose you for an interview. That's why a cover letter is so valuable, because you have your basic pitch in your resume about why you're qualified for the role. And then you get them to read a cover letter, which takes them a step further in wanting to get to know you and you being able to explain your position. And hopefully that then convinces them that you are a potential fit for this role and they want to interview you. I've been seeing a lot of language come through with some job postings where it's like people will self opt out of not applying to jobs because they don't meet all of the qualifications. We still recommend that you apply anyway if you meet, most but not all of them. So keep that in mind. If you feel like you can do the job and you have the skills and you can connect the dots for them, be prepared to do that during the interview. Don't self-select out and decide not to apply just because you don't meet every single checkbox that they're looking for.
Yeah. Like, I can't remember. Did you say this, Abby? I don't think so. It's saying like what they list as requirements in a job posting. The reality might be like maybe the top two things are actual requirements. Like it's a deal breaker if you don't have literally that thing.
Yep.
The others are just like nice to haves, like they're
minimum qualifications are the requirements.
Like they're willing to consider people that might not have that thing if you maybe have something else going for you, so that's the reality. Some jobs are like that, and you don't know which ones are which. You don't know if these are actual requirements or they're just a bunch of nice to haves. So like Abby said, it amounts to the same thing. You just apply anyway if you feel that, if you feel you can do the job, you feel like, or with minimal training, I can certainly do that. I mean, you know what I mean? Just go for it. You know what I'm saying? Like that's the attitude I think people should
and why
take.
not? Maybe you don't get selected and you spent an hour tailoring your documents to apply to this job and submitting an application. It's better to apply and see what happens if you feel like there's a chance than to decide it's not worth it.
Absolutely. I think we're here.
The
Alex,
next one would be actually from Prime.
Okay.
Yep.
You're more tuned into this than I am. We jumped around quite a bit. So
we did.
Okay. Prime says how to deal with job interviews when they ask too much deep theory that's hardly used on the job daily. I'm struggling to remember everything. Tech job. Yeah. Prime, I empathize with that too. There's people that will ask you all kinds of useless theory or niggling details of things. And it's like, it's just irrelevant. It never comes up in practice. Or if it does, you have reference material for that. You know what I mean? Then the one time in a blue moon, it does come up. You know what I'm saying? And so I agree with you. This kind of is reminiscent of why I said something that I said about 20 minutes ago, which was I think that people should give themselves a more strategic pep talk before they go into a job interview, saying, okay, I'm going to go in there and I'm going to make sure I tell them this. And if they want to bring up this or that, my previous jobs, whatever, I'm not going to get into it. I'm going to direct the conversation back to what I do want to talk about. So when they bring up stuff like this, if you're a technical person, a technically minded person, like I'm a technically minded person, we feel a lot of temptation to like answer the exact question that they ask.
Mm-hmm.
So if they ask about some stupid little point of theory that's irrelevant, we don't naturally go, well, that's not really important. What I think is important is blah, and then you change the subject. We will tend to engage on that. And then next thing you know, it's 10 minutes later. We've spent 10 minutes talking about something that doesn't matter at all. It's not making a good case for ourselves.
Rambling. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. Yeah. They've led you down this dead end into this, rambling trip to nowhere. Right. And it served no purpose. You've just burned up all the time you had to like tell them stuff. You know what I mean? So
what I would say in this case, what they're usually looking for is that you are resourceful and adaptable and flexible. And so being honest and saying, I can't remember the exact process for this, but here's what I would do to figure this out. And talk them through your thought process. That would be my recommendation. It is unreasonable to expect a human to know everything. And we're in a technology world right now where we have all this information at our fingertips, that it's actually becoming harder for us to retain information because we're able to seek out the information in such a quick way, get our knowledge, and then move on from it. So what they're going to be more interested in is your ability to find and identify resources and use those without bogging other people down. So keep that in mind. If they ask a really deep theoretical question, you can kind of talk about what hypothetically you would do in that situation and how you would use resources to help you overcome a problem or a question.
Yeah, like it's almost like you need to perfect the art of an abrupt conversational segue. So if they ask you some like weird technical detail about some technical thing, and you could say, well, I've dealt with that before, and you can get into the details on that. But what I found is that in practice, that what's more important than that is maybe this, and so I've put a lot of emphasis on really refining my techniques when it comes to this and getting that right. I found that has a much more, much more effect on the final result than, for example, these types of like little details that don't come up very often in practice, or something like that. So it's not that you're avoiding it. It's not that you're saying like, well, I don't know anything about that, but I want to talk about this, because that could be a red flag. They might think, okay, well, this person doesn't know about that. That's what I'm getting. You say like, no, I know about that. But what I found is that this other thing is more important, and you redirect it. You're not saying I refuse to engage. What you're saying is like, that's important, but this is, when it comes to this stuff, this is actually more important. And then you've just redirected to something you want to talk about. And you could say, oh, and in that area, I've got, here's a success story that I have dealing with that, or here's my opinion on that and how it is the way to like make a sale, or whatever it is you're talking about, right? You have to be able to do that stuff too, because depending on who you're talking to, they can end up leading you down these paths to things you don't want to talk about, either because they're damaging to you. For example, when they want to ask you about your weaknesses and your failures and, things you don't know that you wish you knew, like that's a known thing that people bring up in job interviews. And next thing you know, they've spent the entire interview talking about your weaknesses, and the interview's over and you never even got to mention like what you're great at or what you can do for them, So you got to learn to sort of bring those back, because occasionally you will need to do that in a job interview. So I recommend you think about that stuff.
Agreed. Agreed.
I like how this is getting a bit more animated than we usually do it. I don't know why, but I mean, I just had a Red Bull. I don't know if that has something to do with me,
It's
but
giving you wings, so you're taking off, Bill.
yeah, you're not allowed to say that anymore. Apparently, right? You can't say that they got wings because somebody sued Red Bull because they hadn't received their wings. So
Really?
they that's no longer their slogan. They can't use that anymore.
Oh my gosh.
That's
Oh,
that's you guys in the States, right? The litigious
we,
society, right?
yeah. All right. So Andrea, it looks like,
Okay, here we go.
is our next one. So they said, are pay ranges communicated by headhunters reliable, or could they lie to get the interest of potential candidates?
They could absolutely lie. They can lie about anything right to your face. Just remember that. There's good ones and bad ones.
Yes.
But
And what I would think they would do instead of like flat out lying about the pay is they'll give you the entire range. The top of the range, which is the highest you could ever make in the position, and the bottom of the range, the lowest you will ever make in the position. And so that then gets people like focused on the highest number. And then that's why they might have interest in the position. So I would say organizations are either posting just the full range or they're getting a little bit smarter about that and they're posting the higher range. But yeah, they could totally lie about it. I would hope that they wouldn't choose to pick a number that is not reasonable and that they are not going to follow through on.
Hope springs eternal.
Yeah,
one can always hope.
I can take my rose-colored glasses off and say that they're willing to do the wrong thing, the immoral thing, to try to get their job done.
Willing to do the wrong thing for the right reasons. That's right.
Uh-huh.
Well, listen, the thing that always used to get me with this requirement is that when you think about the process, I kind of mentioned it a moment ago, usually it's the hiring manager that sort of is the impetus behind creating a new position, right? They're the one that decides, wait a minute, I can't keep running my team on overtime. I really need to bite the bullet and hire another permanent person, whatever. So they initiate this, right? And then, they come up with, internally, they decide, okay, this is the type of person we're looking for, maybe these skills, right? And they will have an idea of like what they're willing to pay, right? In their head. Now, in an extreme case, they may not even communicate that verbally to anyone. They will write like, okay, here's the official range in writing that we have to provide. If you're in a region where you have to provide a salary, I know in the States, is it everywhere in the States or is it only in some states?
Only in some states.
Okay,
yep. So
yeah.
in Colorado, they do have to provide a compensation range or like number, but it's not in every state.
Yeah. So there's a discrepancy. The point I'm trying to, this long point I'm trying to make is that sometimes they won't disclose the full range of what they're actually prepared to pay. They'll keep that unofficial. And then instead they'll disclose this narrow kind of thing here as their official range, right? But, through hook or by crook, they can always get it so that, they can pay more if they wanted to, or, things like this. So there's no point I'm trying to make is there's no guarantee that their official numbers or their official range limits are the, in fact, true range limits of what they're prepared to pay. So, you always got to remember that,
Yep.
And I'm very cynical. I've seen people do this, and I understand the temptations to do it too.
Yep.
So.
And in reality, like, why? What is the point of lying about the salary range to like attract high quality candidates who then are like, no, I'm not willing to take lower than what I was expecting? Like, I don't understand it.
Well, it's the same principle as like if you walk into a car dealership to buy a car, something where you kind of it's a variable sort of range and you kind of haggle over it, right? You have all these different, vehicles. Now, what we would love as consumers is you'd love, instead of having a price on each vehicle, how they put the price in the window, you'd like a realistic range of what that dealership would be prepared to part with it for. Yeah. Right? You'd love to see that. That's their reservation price, the lowest they'd ever possibly go. And what the dealership would love is if you had a big sign on your forehead that was glued to your forehead that said, "This is the highest I'm prepared to go." you know?
Mhm.
So they would charge you like, $1 less than that or whatever it is, right?
Yep.
And tell you, I'm sorry, it costs this much. We would all love full and complete information about the other side, and we all don't want to disclose it. So that's why employers, as a sort of default position, they don't want to disclose what their actual range is, because
Yep.
that shows their hand. They don't want that.
Yep.
But they want it from you as a candidate. They
Yeah.
want you to tell them what's the minimum you'd ever take, right?
It's funny how what's good for the goose is not good for the gander necessarily, or
Yeah,
vice
because
versa.
your opponents. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Your opponents. Okay, I'm going to dial it back a little here. You've been very patient. I think I've interrupted you about 4 times in a row. I think I'm just going to dial that back.
So we got Kiwi Magician, I think. So what do you think about
That's the
companies
next one?
paying under minimum wage? Yep. On technical jobs. And I would say it's wrong. Like, if they're paying under minimum wage for a technical job, that makes no sense. So
Not to ask a stupid question, but how is that even legal to pay under
yeah.
minimum wage?
And it could be like maybe under the table where someone is getting paid in cash rather than like, I don't know. And so if you're getting underpaid, quit. It's like, don't.
More than quit. You could blow the whistle on the company.
Yeah.
Do you guys have something in the States? Like in Canada, we have, whatever is the department of the government whose job it is to police the labor laws.
Mm-hmm.
Like you'll have, like you have like the SEC in the States for like, buying and selling security and stuff. You'll have like a branch of the government at some level that, they investigate companies, make sure they're not violating labor laws and exploiting people and stuff.
Yep.
Whoever that branch is, like at least in Canada, they have a website for them where you can read the laws, and then they have a hotline, like a phone number. So if your company's doing some weird things, you can call the number. You don't have to identify yourself. You could say like, I got a question, like how does this work? Are they allowed to do this if this is the case? And you don't have to identify yourself. And you can actually report the company and say like, well, I'm not going to tell you who I am, but I actually work for this company here. And it seems like that's what they're doing. So you might want to investigate them,
For us in the United States, it's the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, which is the federal agency designed to protect employee rights.
Yeah. So that's the agency that deals with that.
Yep.
So can you call them up? Can you ask them questions or not really?
Yep. You can file charges or claims. You can quickly contact them through, I think, email and maybe even a chat bot. So
okay, that's good. Yeah. They can issue you with your own whistle. That would be the next step, the next level thing.
All right. So the next
is this?
That is a good statement. Yeah. Team and boss inheritance is the worst. You just start the politics at that level.
Absolutely. Yeah. You're stuck with somebody that you didn't choose. That's a delightful situation. It can be a real challenge for everybody when that occurs.
I think the next question that hasn't come up already is Oreo says boo. I think that's what that is. A B with 2 zeros afterwards. And it's any advice for a recent aerospace engineering grad from Texas A&M University. I've applied to hundreds of jobs tailoring my resume with barely any interviews. I assume I should do networking instead. It probably depends on where you're applying and the saturation of jobs or the limited availability of jobs for aerospace engineering. Depending on what types of jobs you're applying to with what types of companies, they might receive thousands of applicants or 10 applicants. If you're truly tailoring your resume to the position and to the organization, then you should at least be getting through to some contact with recruiters. But if you're hearing nothing after applying, it's probably got to do with your application process. So are you also submitting a cover letter? Are you thinking you're entitled to higher pay than, what you are qualified for this entry level, aerospace job? So there's probably a lot of other things going on. Networking is an option and a good one. But if you're just looking for that first entry level job, there's probably something happening with the actual application process for you.
Yeah, I agree with Abby. There's 2 roads you can go down really for this stuff. One is the posted job market where you're sending out applications. The other one is networking, where you're accessing mainly the hidden job market, stuff that's not posted. Okay. And that's much bigger, by the way, than the posted job market. You could
If you
do
are a
both.
recent grad, then what I would recommend doing, and you're really struggling, go back to Texas A&M, talk to the career office or your academic advisor and see if they have any connections to organizations that are hiring directly from Texas A&M. So there will be organizations that put their jobs on Texas A&M's job board for recent grads and alumni. And if that's not something you've accessed, try that next.
Yeah. Yes, there's many options available to you. Now, I agree with Abby that if you've applied for hundreds of jobs and not gotten anything, like no bite whatsoever, that the odds are is that there may be something in the process you're doing to apply for jobs that's not optimal. You could do better. I mean, it is possible, but it's unlikely that you would have gotten absolutely nothing after hundreds and hundreds. Even like a response saying like, "Oh, maybe we'll do a phone screening interview or something," like, and you got nothing. Uh, so definitely one option for you to fix this is to revamp and debug your process for sending out applications. Okay, what you want to send out applications that get you interviews. That's the sole purpose of an application. It's not to like, don't be thinking about like, oh, and the final stages when you're getting an offer, I don't want to say anything now that could, conflict with anything like, that the only purpose of a job application is to get you an interview. It's to get you to the next step, right? So work on that process, learn that process. I know Abby has some resources, for that. I've got some resources. Abby does, coaching, right? Like you can maybe explain kind of what you do, what resources you have.
Yeah, so I do like applicant material review sessions where I go through your resume, your cover letter, even your LinkedIn profile if we've got time for that, and kind of compare it to a job that you would like to apply to and give you some feedback on how well aligned your documents are for that specific job. Then I also do specific interview coaching to help you prepare for phone screens, in-person interviews, virtual interviews, one-way interviews, all of those different things. At this stage, it would probably be like a general career coaching session or a strategy session where we try to diagnose what might be going wrong. You might provide me with a job posting and the application package that you put together for that job posting. We can analyze it and see maybe where there were some misalignments or different ways that you could have followed up with the application. But it's a lot of like kind of strategy around the application process, because just putting your documents together and clicking submit, that can work, but it will require a lot more submissions over time for a few number of responses.
Yeah. So there's always a free option for everything. There's a free option to what I have. There's a free option to what Abby has. That's to do your own research. We're talking to you for free. There's a lot of free resources on the internet. You can bone up on that stuff, learn how it works, and then, improve your process. If you need a little help, Abby's got, sort of a more one-on-one kind of career coach type thing. I have courses. That's what I do. I don't really do one-on-one consultations with people. I got courses for that stuff. The other option is to go the networking route. Now, for some people, they may not want to do this. If you're, like Abby mentioned, if you're kind of just starting out, it's your first career job. For some people, it might not be what you want to go with, but I still encourage pretty much almost everybody to consider it, because there's so many benefits in doing this. First of all, like I said, only 20% of jobs are actually posted. The other 80% exist and you can get them, but they're not posted. So you usually access those through networking. The other thing about networking that's great about it, there's two other things that are great about it, I think. One is that there's substantially less competition. You're not going in with 800 other people that are all being compared side by side. You're going in with maybe two other people in being you're putting yourself forward for it. So already the odds go up.
And I would say that the one thing when it comes to networking is that, using this person's comment as an example, I assume I should do networking instead. Networking is not a quick process. You are not going to meet someone one time and then get a job from them. Networking requires time, investment, strategy. Like I I think that's why networking fails for a lot of people is they think that it's going to be like this instant gratification process, and it will take several interactions with a person before you should feel comfortable asking them to help you accomplish something, get a job, put in a good word for you, whatever it might look like. So when it comes to networking, yes, you should start networking now, but you're probably not going to cash in on your network in the next month or in the next 3 months even. It might take some time to build up that network, build up the relationships to where they are willing to put their neck on the line to make a good recommendation for you.
Yeah. The other thing is that networking is an umbrella term. It describes many different processes. It just simply means people talking to other people, right? So as you can appreciate, there's many variations of how that occurs, right? What I want to impress upon a lot of introverted type people like myself is that you can kick ass in networking. It's just that you're going to be doing it a different way than a lot of raging extroverts will do. They will most likely want to go to events, things like job fairs, and then more high level stuff, industry specific events, stuff like that. Doing the whole thing where you schmooze, you go to a wine and cheese event and you're in the room with hundreds of people and you just strike up a conversation. They're more tailored to stuff like that. A lot of introverts, you guys know that's like living hell to you guys. And the reality is that you don't have to do that. Now, a lot of networking, it can fall into the category of what Abby just described, but there's other things that you can do where it's something that you can do from the comfort of your own home. It's all on social networking. For example, the most basic possible thing you can do in networking, on social networking, is basically send out a template message to hiring managers. And you can do this on LinkedIn. And the message will be something along the lines of saying, hello, I'm here. I'm great at this. This is the problem I solve. And if ever you're looking for someone to do that, please let me know, because I know about your company and I know you guys do great work in this area. That's all. Have a great day. And just as you can sort of pepper the world with job applications by applying to all these jobs and sending out, a more or less generic application, you can also send out that message to hiring managers in your hometown or your region that are in your industry. And you can discover hundreds of those very simply in a few minutes if you know how to use LinkedIn and Google Maps and stuff. And then you can connect with the individuals within the companies on LinkedIn, and then you can send them the message over LinkedIn. So, it is possible to do that and get a lot of leads just from doing that. I built up my consulting business doing things like that. You can go a hell of a lot deeper. You can go into informational interviews and all kinds of other things, but it's a whole gold mine worth of resources like that you can tap.
Yes.
Companies that, generally what happens is a hiring manager, we talked twice already in this stream, how the way the job originates is they realize that they need to hire someone. And a lot of times there's a sort of progression of places they will look. The first place will be do I know anyone that is available that could do this job? Right. That's the first. Now, if they happen to know someone, it doesn't go any further than that. They contact that person. They say, can you come in? Let's talk. We might have something, but we don't know. Let's see. Right. If they don't know anyone, they move to the next stage, which is there an internal candidate that I'd like to promote into this role or move sideways into this role? Let's go with that. If I can do that, I will. It's better because I'm getting someone that's tried and true that I'm already familiar with. There's a lot of advantages that they're trusted. They're a known quantity because they've already worked with us for 5 years or something. If the answer is no, then they go to their third step. They go down the hall to the HR department. They say, hey, do you have any resumes on file? People you might have just interviewed that checked out, you've done the background checks on, they're good candidates, but maybe they were the runners up, or whatever reason we didn't go with them. Is there anyone promising that we have on file that you can bring in that might be a fit for this? No? Okay. And only after those three are exhausted do you think, okay, fine, I guess we'll have to post the job, and then that means I got to do a ton of work. I got to write job descriptions and figure out requirements and work with the recruiter and, sit in rounds and rounds of job interviews with, essentially strangers. I don't want to do that. I have my actual job to do. This is just a sideshow, So the point is, if you send out messages like the one I described, you're trying to land into the lap of the hiring manager that realizes they need to hire someone, but is just sort of going down that process. They may not post the job, or it may lead to a job posting, but you're arriving serendipitously right when they realize they need to hire someone, and they receive your message saying, hey, I can do this. If ever you're looking, let me know. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? So there's all kinds of things in this networking umbrella. Some are very basic, some are very sophisticated.
Well, and I'm the kind of person,
I encourage you to learn about it. That's all.
Yes. And I'm the kind of person, if I get like a sales pitch as the very first interaction with someone on LinkedIn, which is essentially what it is when you're saying like, this is the problem that I solve, and if you know anyone who needs help doing this, here we go. I ignore it. I'm like moving on. And so I would think that most people feel that way if they get those kind of unsolicited help me or let me help you do this service or whatever messages on LinkedIn. I think that's how most people feel. But there will be someone who bites, and who, if you send out 50 of those messages to someone, you probably will get 1 or 2 responses. And so if it's easier for you to, do that through LinkedIn, I think that's a great option. We had someone who just commented, her name's Erica, down at the bottom, who says, I found that searching LinkedIn for title and hiring and then looking at posts is a good technique, because you can see recruiters and hiring managers posting links to jobs on their company websites, and then you can actually send them an individual message directly. I think that's a great tip as well. And you can be a little bit more focused and strategic about who's hiring actively, how often or how recent that post is, and engaging with those people directly.
Yeah. Abby is correct that some people think like that. You're absolutely true. But the reality is that it takes all kinds, and it also depends on the message. Now, if people write a very poorly written, salesy spam email type of message, absolutely, people are going to like mark that as spam. But if it comes across as very personable and it's targeted and it's professional, and there's nothing that suggests any red flags about it.
Yeah, it doesn't feel templated. It feels like
like you can send posts. Like, just because you don't know someone, does that mean that if you contact them, they're going to assume you're trying to sell them something? Right. No, if you have good communication skills and you know what to say to them, not necessarily, And the other thing is that you're not asking for anything. If you do it right, you're not asking for anything. You're just saying, listen, I'm here. I do this. If ever you're looking, let me know. Otherwise, have a great, it's that kind of thing. There's all kinds of ways of doing it. For example, one way that when I built my consulting business, what I did is I did like a 2-stage thing, is that, I found the people I was interested in speaking to, but I didn't send them a message first. What I did is I sent them a connection request. Mm-hmm. And so a subset of those people, it was something like 30%. And these are all CEOs that I was contacting. They accepted my connection request. Like, they didn't know me and I didn't know them. Then of those people that accepted my connection request, then I sent them a message very similar to what I just described. Mm-hmm. And it was something like 20% of people responded and said, like, sure, let's have a meeting. Yeah. So it's like 30% of 20%. Now, the thing is, if you're starting with hundreds of targets, which you can easily find, like, I'm in a city of less than 1 million people, and I was looking in very specific industries like industrial services and things like this. And I was getting hundreds and hundreds of targets. So, if you're in a bigger location and you're looking at multiple industries that you could work in that need your skills, there's like tons of targets. We're talking thousands and thousands. So those odds actually work out if you're doing things right. So my point is, even if you're an introvert looking into networking, there's so many possibilities of how to do it. And
Yeah.
there's so many things out there that you can do, that there'll be something that works for you that you can pull off if you just
Yeah.
sort of step into this world. The reason why it's not more successful among people going for worker level jobs is because a lot of people, first of all, they don't realize this is there. And
Mhm.
secondly, at least in my experience, people have never been taught this stuff in like high school and stuff. They've never been introduced to it. I get comments from people saying, who am I to talk to like a hiring manager? And I'm saying, well, who do you have to be, to talk to a hiring manager?
Feeling like I'm a burden to
Yeah.
someone. Yeah.
Like, okay, you could talk to anyone you want. You could talk to CEOs. I mean, I was a CEO. It's not this like thing,
Yeah.
untouchable status or anything.
It's another human being.
Yeah, exactly. Now, if you don't know what to say to them, or you forget about talking to CEOs, you try and talk to your next door neighbor and they don't want to respond to you, because you don't know what to say, or you're getting all in their face and you're like demanding something, which I've seen people say, hey, give me a job. And it's like, no, I don't know who the hell you are. Go away. You know, it's learning a bit of basic communication skills. So anyway, okay, let's get back to the questions. I'm sorry I was delaying everyone. Where are we in this? Did we do the chalices
We did. We
second
did.
question?
It's the same question, just I
It
think
is?
we added to the chat. Yep. And so
Oh,
the
okay.
next person, Nevs, how much lying on a resume is too much? Don't lie on a resume. You can omit information, but don't lie on your resume.
Yeah, exaggeration is fine. No crossing the line into an outright lie.
Yep. And then the next person asked a question about how to reply to weaknesses. I have in the chat right below that a whole playlist of videos I've made on how to answer questions about strengths and weaknesses. There's no best reply to it. You just want to make sure that you're not saying one of your weaknesses is one of the requirements for success on the job. And so there's lots of options of different types of weaknesses that you can pick. And then I think the next true question is the very last.
Exhaustive answer. What are you saying, Andrea?
I think
Are
the
you
next
perhaps suggesting I
question
talk
is
too
at the
much?
very bottom.
Yeah. Are we on this one? Which one are we on? No, we did that.
No, these are more like comments kind of coming through.
Okay.
But the next true question is at the very bottom. It looks like it's Yusuf 1994116.
Okay, I'll take your word for it. I'm just sort of trying to find these ones that we were already right down here at the bottom.
Yep.
Okay.
So these are more like just comments, not necessarily questions for us.
Okay.
So I got drifted from my major. Should I go back to it? Especially, I have never worked with my major and I'm an environmental engineer. My experience is 1.5 years in safety. Okay, so it sounds like you got a degree that you then got a job that was different from the degree you got. And you're wondering if you should go back to the industry, to an environmental engineering industry, even though you're not currently working in the industry. I'd say it's up to you. If you want to go back to it, if it's of interest to you, why not? You'll probably be eligible for more of those entry-level roles, but not, if you're expecting a senior role and you haven't done that type of work before, that's a little unreasonable. But if you want to go back to it, you probably have the minimum qualifications to do it.
Yeah, it's unanswerable. It's entirely up to you. It also depends on what your goals are.
Mm-hmm.
What might be right for one person might not be right for another. You know what I mean? It's not to do with the outside world. It's also to do with what your ambitions are and what you're looking for.
Yeah. One of my degrees is in integrative physiology, which is I was going to use to go into physical therapy or some sort of medical job. And am I doing that? No. If I want to go back to that, I could, but it would be starting at the bottom.
Yeah. So for Yusuf, listen, maybe you've heard of something called an informational interview. I'm not sure if you've I'm assuming everyone knows what a job interview is, right? That's where two people meet and you talk about whether you're going to get a job or not. An informational interview is when two people meet, but you're not there to get a job. You're there to get information, right? So, for example, if you said, like you're considering whether you should become an environmental engineer. Is that my understanding? Did I get that right?
I think.
Yeah, you're kind of like, should I do this or should I do that? What may be useful to you would be if you sat down with someone that went down that career path themselves of being an environmental engineer. Now there's some big shot environmental engineer. They're like running an environmental engineering department somewhere. They're making a lot of money. They're very successful. Would it be useful for you to sit down with such a person and say, like, what advice would you have to someone who's thinking of following in your footsteps? Does it make sense for young people today? Or do you wish you could have done anything else? Or would you recommend, or if I wanted to be an environmental engineer, how would you recommend I go about it? Things like this, right? Now, if that's useful to you, you can do this. Okay. You could go on LinkedIn. I'll spare you all the little niggling details, but you can go on LinkedIn, do a search for people, like a people search that have that degree, environmental engineer, or not the degree, but the role. Maybe they're working as an environmental engineer or some thing that you would do if you have a degree in environmental engineering, whatever it is that you're looking to do. Okay. Whatever your ambition is. And then you can see all those people. You can see them that are in your hometown. You can also then message them through a variety of different means.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Contact them and saying, you could send them a message saying something to the effect of, listen, I'm an aspiring young environmental engineer, and I'd very much like to get your expert opinion on this industry, environmental engineering. I would love to be able to get your maybe half an hour of your time to get your expert opinion on the environmental engineering industry, something like that. Would you
And maybe even better,
Mm.
call them and leave them a voicemail if they don't answer.
Yeah,
Talking to them
but
is
but like you could do that. You could do that's one route you could go down. I would recommend doing it face to face if you possibly can.
Mm-hmm.
If they say, if you say, could you spare like half an hour of your time? Let me know if there's a date and time that works for you. Let me know, the location, and I'll be there. And you go down.
I agree. Having an in-person informational interview is best. When you're reaching out to them, email is safe. Phone call feels a little bit more bold in this day and age. So if you identify an organization in your hometown that has jobs that you could do in environmental engineering, calling a hiring manager up or a supervisor in the organization or someone else who does the type of job, that will leave probably a lasting impression compared to an email, which is really easy to delete or have go into spam or something like that.
Yeah. So informational interviews are your friend. You can sit down with these professionals. And the reason why a lot of them will agree is because it's flattering. How many times do you get a call saying, like, listen, I aspire to be what you are, and I'm just starting out, and I'm wondering if, can you spare me some time and just answer some basic questions about like what you think of this industry and where it's going and what young people should do if they want to do this. A lot of people find that very flattering, and so they'll agree to do it just for that reason. And the advantage of doing it face to face is that first of all, it's much more engaging. Secondly, they can give you a tour around their workplace, if that's useful to you, and you can get some options. You can see where these career paths lead or what some of the options are. As a fringe benefit, you also now have connections. When you leave the informational interview, the last thing you say is like, listen, if I have any more questions, is it okay if I were to give you a call? Would that be okay? 95% of the time they'll say, sure, yeah, not a problem. So, there's a lot of advantages. And this will allow you to really investigate like where these university degrees and things can go, or what career path
data to make the most informed choice about your next step. If you're feeling some sort of like calling back to the environmental engineering side of things, and you're not sure it's going to be the right fit, an informational interview will help you quickly determine if this is the work that is a good fit for you.
Yeah, these are the things that you have the power to do. You can talk to anybody. Now they have the perfect right to refuse to talk to you. But if you send a very professional, very polite, very short communication with a very basic, simple request that they can grant, and it's sort of stroking their ego to say yes, to these things. A lot of people will say yes. And I mean, I've done this. It's things like this that have helped me my entire career.
Yes.
How, as an introvert, I can connect with some pretty powerful people that can open doors for me when
Yep.
I don't have like friends, in that world, but I can sort of get into that world by doing things like this. And another reason why this works is because very few people are doing this. So you really elevate yourself above the crowd.
Yeah.
How many requests have they had this week for some young person just wanting to talk to them about,
Them.
their profession?
Yeah.
Not very many, like zero, so this really stands out. So
People
anyway,
like talking about themselves. So if you can ask them questions that demonstrate your
absolutely.
interest and curiosity in them and their work and the things that they enjoy and like asking them about themselves, that's a great way to build a good relationship with someone.
Yes, I agree. That's great. Where are we in this? I guess is it Andrea that we?
Yeah, we've got just
Oh,
some.
Andrea's responding to my comment there. I appreciate the details. You're absolutely welcome, Andrea. You're awesome. I wasn't offended. It was a feign offense, right? Especially when you do this like that. It's kind of a gesture, right? You throw your head back and laugh
Yes.
like that.
Well, I think our very last question, which aligns with almost a 2-hour live stream, is from Alper AK, which is that I'm aware of my weak points for a position because of some inside knowledge. I'm also aware that my experience can benefit the business. In this situation, how can I sell myself? Don't focus on the weak points. Focus
Yeah.
on the things that you bring that make you unique and special to helping this position be more successful. If they bring up some of the weak points or they ask you about your weaknesses, frame them in ways that you're working to improve or how you mitigate or manage those weaknesses, and then move on.
So Alper, imagine you want to buy a car, okay? And you go down, like I was talking about this earlier, you go down to the car dealership, right? And you probably have an idea of the type of car you want to buy, right? Now,
Your minimum qualifications.
how would you feel if a salesperson came up to you and said, you said like, well, I'm kind of looking for an orange car. You don't see orange cars on the road that many. I think it's kind of cool. This orange, maybe some chrome on the side. I don't care if it's a cheap car, just some chrome, an orange, and it doesn't break down. That's kind of what I'm looking for, right? How would you feel about a salesperson coming up to you and saying, well, listen, I can give you a great deal on this green pickup truck. Okay. It needs a bit of work done, but if you take it to the garage and they fix it up, it probably won't break down on you, but it's green. It's a pickup truck, and pickup trucks that are green are really hot right now. So you should be interested. How would you feel about that? You'd
That's
probably
a great
think,
metaphor.
like, no, I just said I'm looking for something orange, something cheap, something with chrome, and it doesn't break down. This is neither of those things. That's what unless you're going to talk to me about something that's orange, chrome, cheap, or won't break down, I'm not interested.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So that's a little bit what it's like for the person looking to fill a job. They've said, look, okay, we're looking for a person that has this education, this experience, these skills, maybe this personality trait. Okay. That's what we're looking for. Okay. Now you show up and you say, listen, the great thing about me is that I'm very creative. Okay. And I'm a pleasure to talk to. And, I spent 10 years in university studying architecture. So, I mean, any aspect of this job that needs like a little bit of architecture, it's like, I'm your guy, right? What do you think their response to that is going to be? It's going to be like, well, okay, great, but that's not what I'm looking for. I said I'm looking for this education, these skills, this experience, this personality trait. Unless you got those, we got nothing to talk about because I'm not interested, So does that help understand what their mentality is? They're mainly interested in hearing the things that they said they're looking for and the things that they're looking for being echoed back to them, maybe with some evidence that you do in fact have that. So if you do have that experience, you say, I got this experience, and then you talk to them about that experience. This is what I did specifically. This is why it's good. This is what I can do for you. Because then when you start talking about that stuff, their ears pick up and they go, this there may be some potential in this, right?
Having some awareness of your weak spots or weak points is great, because then you can proactively mitigate that for the interviewer if it comes up. But I wouldn't say that you bring it up unless they do.
Yeah, don't bring up any weakness. Don't bring up any point of improvement. That's not what you lead with, right? That would be like the salesperson with a car thing coming up to you and saying well, you could get this car. It is orange, but it's got no muffler. And I think it's only fair that you realize that the tires have been on that car for 35 years. So
and it's never had an oil change.
Yeah. Is it sounding like a car you're going to want to buy already? No. You see, that's the problem with weaknesses, right? You might have weaknesses. Everybody's got weaknesses. That's and it's great that you know yours, but you don't lead with that. You only talk about that stuff reluctantly, if at all. You lead with your strengths.
Yep.
And the strengths in particular are not strengths that you see as strengths. They're strengths that they said they're looking for.
Yeah.
Okay. That's kind of how this works. So hopefully that makes sense.
Yep. I think so. I hope it does.
If Abby wants to add anything to that.
Yeah. I've got a whole playlist that I posted up earlier about how to answer strengths and weaknesses questions. I'll re-share it in the chat right now. I'm getting that link. But in order to sell yourself, you're not focusing on the weak spots, the gaps, the blind spots, anything like that. If it comes up, be prepared to address it, but don't start there.
Yes. Erica M. That was a VJ on Much Music in Canada back in the day. Back in the good old days, 35 years ago or something. Anyway, what about yellow? You said you liked orange because you don't see it on the road very often. You can spin off of that. Yeah, I suppose. But you could talk about yellow, but you're making the assumption that if they like orange, they will like yellow. That's kind of a stretch. It's like if they're saying we want someone with a Bachelor of Science, and you could say, well, I got an engineering degree. I got from community college. It's like, okay, great. But no, I want a Bachelor of Science, right? So some things they'll accept, but some things they won't. You want to try and talk to them exactly about what they said, right? As much as possible.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You don't want to start talking about something you think is a strength. You want to always go to what they think is a strength and work from there. Okay, and that's the end of the chat. After what, 2 hours?
Almost, yeah. I think we had some really good questions come in and some good conversation. And Bill and I don't currently have our next one scheduled, but it's probably going to be in 2 Mondays. And Bill streams really frequently on his channel, so he's available fairly often to answer your questions when it comes to your job search and career growth and development.
Yes, I'm always available.
Yeah. I stream very consistently with Bill every 2 weeks.
Yes.
But if you watch any of my videos, put comments on them, engage in some community posts, eventually I will be able to get back to you. Otherwise, if you're looking for some individual one-on-one coaching to help you identify or diagnose what might be going on in your job search, why you're not getting interviews, why you're not able to make it through a certain step in the interview process, how to negotiate your salary, how to update your resume, all of those things. I do offer one-on-one individualized coaching for that. So I'll put my email in the chat if you're interested. Otherwise, I think Bill and I will be excited to see, hopefully, all of you again in about 2 weeks.
Yes. If you are experiencing issues with your job search, at least one person definitely was saying directly, you have a variety of different options available. One of them is, like Abby just said, is one-on-one coaching, getting someone to do a pretend job interview with you and give an objective opinion on what you're doing. Now, this could apply to the interview phase where, if you're getting interviews, but you're not getting offers. So you could work on that interview phase with Abby. If you are in the application phase, you're not even getting interviews yet. You're sending in applications, but you're not getting any interviews. There could be an issue with your application. You don't know. You might suspect it after a while. How many job applications do you need to submit without any responses coming back for you to realize that there might be an issue? So if you suspect that, and that's where you are right now, Abby can help you with that also. She does one-on-one work, individualized work with people on that. And I believe, Abby, you were telling me a couple of weeks ago that like some people, they'll just even do like just one session. Just one session can be very useful just, in itself. You can tell obvious red flags and things in how people interview or what they're doing on their application. So it's something to consider if you need individualized help there.
Yes.
So I'd recommend that you check out Abby's channel and look at some of the resources she has to help you with stuff like that. This is going out live on my channel, on Abby's channel, wherever you are watching this from. We will be back in 2 weeks. Thanks so much. You guys are awesome. Chin up. This is a depressing kind of period in people's lives when they're between jobs and stuff, but it's only temporary. You will find something very, very soon. And if you need additional help, we can help you with that. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
We'll see you soon.